tonight. Clive.
Oh dear. All right, Helen, thank you. Helen Willis there. That's it. You can keep up with all the latest developments on the BBC website, but the news continues here on BBC One as we join our colleagues for the news where you are. Bye for now.
Good evening, I'm Annabel Tiffin. Lucy Letby killed 7 babies in her care. How did it happen and why was it allowed to happen? Welcome to a special edition of North West Tonight, where we also welcome viewers watching around the UK. Guilty nurse Lucy Letby is the most prolific baby killer in modern times.
She perverted her learning and weaponised her craft to inflict harm, grief and death.
This is the moment she was arrested. Today she's guilty of murdering 7 babies and trying to kill 6 more. As baby deaths rose at the Countess of Chester Hospital, why didn't the Trust act sooner?
They'd given themselves the role of the investigating officer when they didn't have the skills to do so, and certainly didn't have the openness of mind to consider the unthinkable.
And heartbroken, angry and numb, we hear from parents whose newborns died in Letby's care.
He had blood around his mouth and Lucy was there.
It's just beyond your imagination that somebody's on a ward killing babies. It's unbelievable.
She is the most prolific killer of babies in modern British history. Lucy Letby, a nurse responsible for looking after the sickest of newborns. Instead, she set about killing them. Between June 2015 and June 2016, she murdered 7 babies and tried to kill 6 more. She deliberately injected some with air, force-fed others with milk and poisoned 2 of the infants with insulin. She was finally caught after a 2-year investigation by Cheshire Police. Well, Stuart Pollitt was in court for the verdict today. He joins us now live from Manchester Crown Court. Stuart.
Thanks, Annabel. Yes, the trial has been going on here since October, through autumn, through winter, spring and on into summer. The jury had been deliberating for 22 days. They've been delivering partial verdicts over the last 10 days. But this lunchtime, the jury informed the judge they could no longer reach an agreement on the outstanding counts, which brought this trial to a conclusion. And that means we can now report the full facts of this case, and those facts are that Lucy Letby murdered 7 babies and attempted to murder 6 more. Now, the court was absolutely packed to hear the end of the trial. Victims' families were present, many of them holding hands, some of them clutching baby toys. But one person wasn't in court, Lucy Letby. She had attended some of the previous guilty verdicts, but in the last few days she has refused to come into the dock to face those families and to face up to her crimes. Now, I could give you all manner of facts and figures about the scale of this case and this investigation, but to see its impact, you had to be in that court to see the anguish on the faces of the mothers and fathers who've lost a child. Afterwards,
I speak on behalf of the entire prosecution team when I say that all of their babies will forever be in our hearts. I cannot begin to imagine how the families in this case feel today. I just hope that today's verdicts bring all of them some peace of mind for the future.
Lucy Letby was entrusted to protect some of the most vulnerable babies. In her hands, innocuous substances like air, milk, or medication like insulin would become lethal. She perverted her learning and weaponised her craft to inflict harm, grief, and death.
To lose a baby or to have a baby harmed in these particular circumstances is unimaginable. Today, justice has been served and a nurse who should have been caring for our babies has been found guilty of harming them. But this justice will not take away from the extreme hurt, anger and distress that we've all had to experience.
Reactions from outside court there. Lucy Letby will be sentenced here on Monday, whether she is present or not. Meanwhile, the prosecution has asked for 28 days to consider whether to seek a retrial on the 6 outstanding counts in this case. But the events from today from this court are clear, and that is that a nurse who should have been in charge of caring for tiny babies is now the most prolific child killer in modern British history. Annabel.
Stuart, thanks very much. So how was Lucy Letby caught? Well, our reporter Andy Gill has been following the case since her arrest and throughout the long trial. He reports now on the complex police investigation.
Hello, Lucy, is it?
Yes.
Hello, my name's Cheshire Police. Locate Tiffin, 2 seconds.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Police arrive at Lucy Letby's home in Chester early in the morning in July 2018. They're investigating unexplained deaths of premature babies at the hospital where she worked.
I'm going to put you in the back seat over here.
Later, an officer leads her to a car to be taken for her first police interview. She's asked if she knows why she's been arrested.
They told me that there would be a lot more deaths and that I'd been linked to somebody that's there for a lot of them.
Did you have any concerns that there was a rise in the mortality rate?
Yes.
Okay, so tell me about that. What concerns did you have?
I think we don't just notice as a team in general, the nursing staff, that this was a rise compared to previous years.
Lucy Letby had done special training to look after vulnerable babies at the Countess of Chester's neonatal unit, a young woman qualified to help keep alive tiny babies at the start of their lives. A young woman who sent jokey messages to colleagues about getting the Prosecco in for her housewarming party. A young woman who murdered children she was supposed to care for. When one of the doctors here at Chester first heard that Nurse Letby's name was being linked to the deaths and attacks, he said, "No, it can't be Lucy, not nice Lucy." Another doctor told her that she was one of the few nurses in the region who he'd trust with his own children. But her trial heard that she was the constant, malevolent presence when babies were killed or attacked. On post-it notes found at her Chester home, Letby protested her innocence. But on one she wrote, "I am evil. I did this because I'm not good enough to care for them." Her defence said this was the anguished outpouring of a young woman realising what she was accused of and not a confession. The jury decided that the note did reveal the truth.
I was surprised that there was so much material that quite graphic in its nature in what she wrote, that was there, almost presented to us when we arrived. When you overlay it with all of the evidence we've got of placement and times and eyewitnesses and medical evidence, then it's very damning.
The court heard that Letby used a variety of methods to kill and harm babies. She was accused of injecting her victims with air, with excess fluids, of poisoning them with insulin, of interfering with their breathing tubes, of physically assaulting them. The attacks happened mainly when Letby was on the night shift. When she was moved to days, the collapses also moved to the daytime. Some incidents happened within hours of each other. Sometimes weeks passed between them. The jury was shown a chart of who was on duty when the collapses happened. The only common denominator was Lucy Letby. Because Letby denied all the charges she faced, police and prosecutors weren't able to say why she did what she did. Between June 2015 and June 2016, at a unit dedicated to the care of the most vulnerable, a murderer was at work. Babies died. Others were left brain damaged. Some survived attacks unscathed. Parents were bereaved. Colleagues left distressed and disbelieving. Lucy Letby was meant to care. Instead, she killed.
Andy Gill with that report. Well, in the last hour, the Health Minister, Helen Whatley, has been giving her reaction to the conviction of Lucy Letby. She's announced a public inquiry and says the central question is why the hospital took so long to stop her.
Doctors repeatedly raised their concerns, and that didn't lead to the action being taken that you would have expected. This is one of the things that clearly the inquiry, I think, should look into. That the chair of that inquiry will set the scope of it, but that's definitely something where there are questions to be answered.
Well, let's go to the Countess of Chester Hospital now and join our health correspondent, Jill Dummigan. And Jill, as the Minister said there, the Trust has some really big questions to answer about the time it took for Care Baby Unit.
Yes, the first murder that Lucy Letby's been convicted of happened in June 2015, the last shortly before her removal from the unit, around a year later. Now, this was a small unit. Senior clinicians say that fairly early on they were raising concerns about this sharp increase in the death rate, but one of them has told the BBC that senior clinicians just didn't seem to believe that Lucy Letby could be responsible.
Oh.
So many questions being raised there. So the BBC has asked for responses. Tony Chambers, the former chief executive, told us that no serious concerns were raised to him and the executive team before June 2016, and at that point they acted. He also says the police were called in following a meeting that the Trust had suggested rather than the consultants. He says his thoughts are with the children at the heart of the case, their families and loved ones, and that he's truly sorry for what the families have gone through. He said the crimes are appalling, he's deeply saddened, and that as chief executive, his focus was on the safety of the baby unit and the well-being of patients and staff. He adds that there are always lessons to be learned, and the best place for this to be achieved would be through an independent inquiry. Now, Ian Harvey, the former medical director, also says he doesn't remember any concerns being raised to him before May 2016, and that he had an open door policy. He also said a number of these allegations had already been looked at by the General Medical Council, and the case was closed with no further action. He added his thoughts are with the babies and their families, and he was sorry for their suffering. As medical director, he says he was determined to keep the baby unit safe and support their staff. He said he wanted the reviews and investigations carried out so they could tell the parents what had happened to their children, and he too said that he would help with any future inquiry. So what of the hospital itself? They released a statement this afternoon. They didn't directly address any of the specific questions raised, but also said that they were saddened and appalled by what had happened. They said they were extremely sorry that the crimes were committed at their hospital, this hospital, and that they were committed to ensuring that lessons continued to be learned, and they wanted to reassure every patient that they can have confidence in the care they will receive. Now, I know we had a technical problem with the package before. I think we can bring that report to you now.
To us, the evidence in front of us was quite clear. It felt that they're trying to engineer some sort of narrative or way out of this that didn't involve going to the police.
They'd given themselves the role of the investigating officer when they didn't have the skills to do so, and certainly didn't have the openness of mind to consider the unthinkable.
Until June 2015, there were fewer than 3 baby deaths a year here, but that month there were 3 within a fortnight. The neonatal unit carried out a review of care.
There was nothing in common that we could pin this 3 deaths on, but the staffing analysis did identify that Lucy Letby was on shift for those 3 episodes.
In the following months, 2 more babies died unexpectedly, again with Lucy Letby on shift. 3 others had suddenly collapsed. By October, Dr. Breary was starting to have some very uncomfortable thoughts.
It's something that nobody really wants to consider, you know, that a member of staff might be harming the babies under your care.
But Dr. Breary felt he had to consider that Lucy Letby might be responsible and that others should be considering it too. Dr. Breary contacted a manager to discuss his concerns, but the manager thought Letby's presence was just an unfortunate coincidence. The following February, he asked for an urgent meeting with senior managers. He got it in May. Letby continued to work on the unit. In June 2016, after 2 more deaths, with 7 consultants now demanding her removal, Lucy Letby was finally redeployed. One of the consultants now wanted the police to be brought in. The Trust thought otherwise.
We had a number of meetings with senior management. It was quite clear that they weren't going to budge, and they didn't think appropriate to go to the police at that stage.
Instead, they commissioned 2 external reviews. The consultants kept pushing for action. By the following spring, they demanded that the police were brought in. Within days of the first meeting with Cheshire Police, a criminal investigation was launched.
We've seen paediatricians bravely speak out over several years and be treated appallingly.
Dr. Susan Gilby became the medical director a month after Lucy Letby was arrested in 2018, becoming chief executive soon after. Even then, she said, there was a reluctance to accept that Letby could have done anything wrong.
There was a very, very strong opinion that even though the police had seen fit to make this arrest, and therefore must have had evidence that they'd found in their lengthy investigation to present to Lucy Letby, the feeling was that there would be nothing found.
Dr. Breary believes that police investigation would never have even happened if he and his colleagues hadn't persisted.
I'm sure, yeah. That was the intention of the executives, was to somehow close this case.
Today, nearly 8 years after those first suspicions were raised to the Trust, Lucy Letby's guilt was confirmed by the jury.
At the end of the day, there is only one serial killer of babies that's worked in that organisation, and the executive team were not the people who were responsible for the deaths of those babies.
Dr. Gilby left the Countess of Chester at the end of last year on an unrelated matter. She's now suing them for constructive dismissal. She says the NHS needs to examine how events in the neonatal unit were handled.
They had some opportunities to reach out to others who might have been able to get to the bottom of what was happening and indeed to stop it from happening. And I think those opportunities could have been taken earlier. I hope that opportunities were not missed, but I fear that they might have been.
Jill Dummigan reporting there. Now, right at the centre of this horror story are the families of the babies killed and injured by Lucy Letby. 2 of the children she was found guilty of attacking were twins, known during the trial as Baby E and Baby F. Baby E died. Baby F survived with life-changing disabilities. Her parents have been talking to the BBC about the moments leading up to the death of their son.
In the corridor, I could immediately hear crying. Well, it felt more than crying. It was screaming. It was screaming, and I was like, what's the matter with him? I walked into the room, seeing it was my boy. He had blood around his mouth, and Lucy was there. Lucy said, oh, don't worry. She has this really calm demeanour about her, and she's, very, very softly spoken. And don't worry, the registrar was coming. She'd already contacted him. He was on his way, and she told me to go back to the ward.
I was trying to reassure my wife that, listen, these people are experts, and, if they say there's not a problem, you've got nothing to worry about. And that was the first phone call. Quickly followed up by a second phone call with a midwife saying, you need to get here now. And there was a third phone call telling me, where are you? The priest has been called. And I just knew. I knew at that point.
The consultant, and she said, we're going to stop. We want him to die in your arms rather than being worked on. So we said, okay. And they passed him to us. And he died. I think she's a hateful human being. She's taken everything from us. Absolutely everything.
It's just beyond your imagination that somebody's on a ward killing babies. It's unbelievable.
Because what she's done has changed the course of our life forever.
Well, a BBC Panorama documentary called Lucy Letby, the nurse who killed, will be available to watch on iPlayer later today. And this is a really distressing case, so if you or someone you know needs help after hearing about it, the details of organisations offering assistance can be found on the BBC's Action Line website. That's at bbc.co.uk/actionline. Now, no one knows why Lucy Letby committed her horrific crimes. Police and the prosecution have no idea what her motive was. This serial killer was a daughter of Middle England with a comfortable family background, a dedicated nurse in the special baby unit, without a single caution or blemish on her record. So who is Lucy Letby?
News of Lucy Letby's arrest made headlines around the world. Our top story. A 28-year-old nurse is still being questioned.
Lucy Letby worked at the Countess of Chester and Liverpool Women's Hospitals.
Leaving her Chester home, wearing a blue leisure suit, Lucy Letby, then aged 28, was first brought into police custody in the early hours of the 3rd of July 2018. She grew up nearly 100 miles away in Hereford with her mum Susan and dad John. As the first person in her family to go to university, Lucy Letby then made Chester her home. Studying nursing for 3 years at the city's university, she started at the Countess of Chester Hospital full-time in 2012 and later qualified to work with predominantly the sickest babies in intensive care by 2015. By April 2016, she had moved into her house in Westbourne Road, just over a mile away from the hospital. 5 months later, she received a letter from the Royal College of Nursing outlining the allegations against her. During the trial, she said she had always wanted to work with children, and taking the stand in court 6 months into her trial, Lucy Letby started to cry as images of her home were shown to the jury, including her bedroom with cuddly toys on the bed. Letby told her defence barrister that she had been prescribed antidepressants by her GP after receiving the letter, which she says she is still taking. She said she had previously had quite an active social life outside work, regularly attending salsa classes and going on holiday and out with friends. Since November 2020, Lucy Letby has remained in police custody across 4 different prisons.
Roger Johnson there. Now, Lucy Letby's crimes will resonate across the country, but particularly in the city of Chester, where the hospital is based. Our reporter Phil McCann is from Chester himself, and he joins us from there now. Phil.
Annabel, Chester, of course, is known for being a beautiful city. It's also a small city, and so when big things happen here, they really resonate. It doesn't get any bigger, of course, than this. That ugly 1970s building where Lucy Letby worked, the Women's and Children's building at the Countess. It's a scene of so many happy memories for thousands of people from across this area. Some painful memories too, of course. I've been in that unit with both of my kids. But those memories are now overtaken, aren't they, by the fact that that building is a crime scene of one of the worst crimes committed against babies in modern British history. Now, I've been speaking to parents across this city as this trial's been progressing and got from them an overwhelming sense of shock, of course, but also very literally of disbelief.
Let's make music. It's time to have some fun.
The maternity department at the Countess has made memories and changed lives for thousands around West Cheshire and North Wales. Darla, Asher and Fran were all born there.
I would have another baby there, 100%.
Yeah, I would recommend it to anybody, definitely.
He was 5 weeks premature, so we stayed at the neonatal unit for 2 weeks, and we couldn't fault them. They were absolutely amazing.
Lucy Letby's trial began before some of the babies that come here to Moo Music in Chester every week were even born. It was in the news when Gabby was expecting Sienna. and when Jack was waiting to welcome Ellie into the world.
You kind of try and say, oh, there must be some mistake, that couldn't possibly have happened because it's just too horrible to even comprehend. But yeah, just absolutely shocked. And when it's local as well, it just seems to hit home a little bit more.
Not a lot happens in Chester. It's quiet, not a lot changes. So yeah, when it happens in where you were born and where your child was born, it kind of hits a bit closer to home.
This is a city that's thought of as a safe place to bring up kids.
It's got so much to do. Obviously, you've got the zoo and the river. There's just so many lovely things to do, and it's a friendly and safe area.
This department has also been able to rely on the people of Chester. For 4 years, until 2017, the annual Santa Dash, Zumbathons, loads of events were held for the Baby Grow Appeal to fundraise for a new neonatal unit at the Countess. Letby was a neonatal nurse, and so here she was in 2013, posing for a picture to promote the appeal. This whole case has caused people like Claire to think.
It was really positive. The staff, right from my very first appointment, listened.
Claire's son Rory was born at the Countess in 2016, when Letby was working there. He's 7 now.
You do think, what if? I think I was probably very lucky that my labour had gone really well, and actually we came out of theatre and were together, and I didn't have any time away from the baby. But yeah, I think anybody who was there at that time has probably had that thought in their head.
Lucy Letby leaves behind a city full of parents with unanswerable questions and raw shock at what happened in their maternity unit in their city, where their children were born. Phil McCann, BBC North West Tonight, Chester. And that maternity unit, that building where Lucy Letby worked, is soon to be demolished. It's being replaced. The scene of her crimes is going to be erased from this city's landscape. But the memory of her victims and those whose lives she attempted to take in this city, well, they'll certainly live on.
Phil, thank you very much. Phil McCann live in Chester City for us this evening. Well, as we've heard, this has been an extremely distressing case. Today we've heard shock, outrage and grief. People struggling to come to terms with why an outwardly caring and compassionate young nurse was in reality a serial killer who, as the prosecution lawyer said, weaponised her craft to maim and murder. We don't know why she did it. We may never know. There's talk tonight of reviews and public inquiries, huge questions for the Countess of Chester Trust and the wider NHS to address. Now, how, after repeated warnings, was Lucy Letby allowed to carry out a year-long campaign of murder? But that's for the future. Tonight, Lucy Letby has been found guilty of the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 6 more. So our final thoughts must be with her victims and their grieving families. Thank you for watching. Good night.